This would have increased the size of the Supreme Court to 15 justices from 9. Roosevelt wanted to appoint 6 more and change the Supreme Court's mind that way. Unfortunately, in my view, the Supreme Court bent to that political pressure and actually just directly changed its mind on the constitutionality of the New Deal because they rather would see the Supreme Court's independence preserved than continue to strike down the New Deal. This was probably ruined Roosevelt's second term. He lost ultimately, but he won the larger war. The New Deal, acts like Social Security and the National Labor Relations Act, and a lot of the constitutional basis for federal regulation of the economy now were all upheld by the Supreme Court then. But I think, no matter whether you are a fan or not of the New Deal, I think Roosevelt does deserve his place as the third greatest president in history because of World War II. For seeing earlier than most the threat that Nazi Germany posed to American security and bringing us through that war. It should be acknowledged that Roosevelt did this by exercising his presidential powers a great deal. If you remember, in the 1930s, Congress passed a series of what were called the Neutrality Acts, which were designed to prevent the United States from aiding the Allies or any side in World War II. And Roosevelt basically defied them. He went ahead and provided a great deal of assistance to the British and the French. He did everything he could to bring the United States into the war. And I think, actually, American history and the world's history would have been much better off if the United States had entered the war earlier and Hitler had been stopped sooner. But let me give you some of the things Roosevelt did. So, the main act prevented the United States from providing any kind of military aid to any of the combatants in World War II. FDR, however, decided to give 50 destroyers to Great Britain during the Battle of Britain, which were critical at that time for the convoys going back and forth across the Atlantic. And he was challenged on this, and he said how's this consistent with the Neutrality Act's ban on aiding any of the fighting countries in World War II? And he said, well, those destroyers, they're what we call, quote-unquote, overaged. And so they were basically surplus and could be given away to the British for free. So he got away with that. Then he started taking airplanes, fighter planes and bombers, directly out of American factories, sending them to Canada where they were transferred over to the British. And he was challenged at this at a press conference, how's that consistent with the Neutrality Acts? And he said, aeronautic technology is changing so fast, those planes are already obsolete. We need to just get rid of them. Then he started doing more. He had a secret meeting with Winston Churchill where he said he was trying to create a military incident in the North Atlantic to bring the United States into war. He secretly ordered the Navy to start attacking German submarines, which they started to do. But it really wasn't until Pearl Harbor when the country entered World War II and his other schemes succeeded. But it should be added that Roosevelt used presidential power inconsistently with the wishes of Congress through its own statutes to try to achieve that end. Let me talk a bit about the worst presidents. So I talked a little bit about Buchanan, who deferred to Congress at the start of the Civil War, would have let the South secede because he didn't think the president had any power to stop them. Let me talk about James Madison, who I would nominate as also one of the worst presidents in American history. Madison was probably one of the smartest men to ever be president. And I actually have the view that smart people don't actually make good leaders and don't make good presidents. But Madison was smart. Madison basically wrote the first draft of the Constitution. He was the one of the authors of the Federalist Papers who saw the Constitution through its ratification. He would become Secretary of State under Jefferson. He founded the Democratic Party with Jefferson, became Secretary of State under Jefferson, and then eventually president himself.
John, you're the worst war criminal there.
liberals don't really believe in free speech. But you know, so I started But again, I'm glad to help Richard do outreach to new communities to join the We've got a lot of potential members out there you didn't know about. So Madison was a little guy. He was 5'1". He had a very high squeaky voice. He loved to work on committees and take notes. The only reason we know what happened in the Constitutional Convention is that he took notes of the debates. He hated meeting people, hated shaking people's hands and getting to meet them in groups, which is, you know, as you can imagine, he's probably one of the most favorite presidents of professors everywhere. So Madison, when he becomes president, we're still trying to stay out of the wars on the continent. And Madison, thinking that, as he took this position under the Washington administration, thinking that it's up to Congress to decide foreign policy, not the president, allowed the Congress to decide that we should enter the War of 1812. It's a myth today, I think, actually, that it's the presidents who tend to be more warlike. In our history, Congresses have been equally warlike. I mentioned the Spanish-American War of 1898 is a good example. The War of 1812 is also an example. The War of 1812, I would say we've been in some terrible wars, but I would think strategically the War of 1812 is probably the dumbest war we ever entered. If you think about it, right? The British or French are battling to the death this time between the British and Napoleon. The United States is making enormous amounts of money trading with both countries. We actually, the level of the internet of exports and trade the United States is making at that time is not reached until 1914. So what does the United States do? We decide to declare war on the only power that has a navy. We decide to declare war against the only side that has troops on our border. Right? And why? Because new members of Congress, freshman members of Congress at the time, wanted to invade Canada. And this is a common theme in American history that I've never understood. Is why do Americans constantly want to take over Canada? All the smart Canadians moved down here eventually. And I will admit, though, that if we had done that, we would have had universal health care a lot faster than today. And it's a terrible war, right? You only remember, but the British and the French, the British easily stop our efforts to invade Canada. They land a force at Washington, D.C., which captures the American capital and burns it to the ground. And if not, and had the plan at the Battle of New Orleans to land a force at New Orleans and try to split the country in half, in one of the sad moments of diplomatic history, the United States actually signed a treaty of peace with Britain before the battle actually occurred, but news didn't get here until later. But because of that, I think Madison is a good example of presidents who defer too much to the other branches actually can be harming the country when we are at a time of crisis. So let me close by just making some observations about presidential power and about the Obama administration and opening up for questions. And anyone else dressed in orange wants to go around screaming. So the first thing is the basic lesson about the executive branch existing to protect the country during times of crisis and war. That's the only reason the framers put the presidency in the Constitution. And that's why the presidency is, if you think about it, is designed in such a strange way. Right? Most countries in the world are parliamentary democracies, right? Where the executive branch and the legislature are merged together, right? The leaders of the party in the legislature are the executive branch. There is no separation of powers between the presidency, the executive, and the legislature in most other Western democracies.
War criminal, you don't know.
chair to apologize for all this. I sort of responsible for it. So I don't quite know what to do.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
So, but I feel actually quite bad there. I mean, sometimes I have to say at my house, I have some protesters every now and then who show up. And I really feel badly for them because they go to all that effort, especially the guy in the motorized wheelchair who rides back and forth in front of my house. I feel so bad that they make the trip up, Centennial Drive above the football stadium just to protest me. I'm usually not at home either, and I can't see them in front of my house. It's such a waste of human resources. It bothers me. I also think they're going to, throw themselves in front of a car or something and get hit in front of my house. So I feel really badly about it. That doesn't mean I want to invite them in for dinner either. So the other thing I was going to say is that the presidency is designed in such a strange way, right? It's one person, right, at the top of the executive branch. It's not a cabinet government. It's not connected to the legislature. And the reason for that, right, the reason it's designed so obvious is so that the presidency could act swiftly. Right? The framers actually talked a lot about the road and constitution. Anybody else? So well, at least you get a sense of what it's like to be on the Berkeley campus. Although none of them seem young enough to be students either. Although some people like college so much that they continue to go even after they graduate. But I'd say the flip side of the framers' vision of the presidency is being able to act quickly in the time of challenge, crisis, and circumstance is that when it's peacetime, when particularly in domestic matters, the framers didn't want the president to exercise any of these powers that I've been talking about. They expected the presidency in domestic affairs to actually be a check on Congress. That's why they gave the president the veto power, so that he could or she could stop Congress from going too far and trying to engage in too much radical change. That the president then was sort of active in foreign affairs and national security, but modest in domestic affairs. The other thing is that the framers, when they designed the presidency, thought that the major check on the presidency would be the political process and the constitutional powers of the other branch. So they didn't think that the Supreme Court would be in the job of adjudicating what presidents could and couldn't do. They expected Congress, primarily through its power of the purse, power of the domestic legislation, power over appointments, and so on, to be constantly checking the presidency, but in the political process. So today, I think what we have, we do have periods where presidents are exercising a lot of power in very controversial ways. It's not a constitutional defect, though. I'd say Congress often doesn't want to step up and bear the responsibility for making choices and overruling the president trying to counteract. And they think they're very happy to let the president actually